As we talk about getting data from the web API and using that data in applications, we really need to spend a little bit of time talking about other MIME types. Now, this isn't the people who are perpetually trapped in boxes in the park. This is a format that all files that come over the internet correspond to. Every bit of content that you send across the internet has a MIME type that's specific to the kind of content that it is. So if you're sending XML, its MIME type is text/XML. If you are sending cascading style sheets, its MIME type is text/CSS. If you're sending images, that has a MIME type that doesn't even have text in it because it's binary data, and PDFs, and Excel spreadsheets, and comma delimited files, on and on. Every piece of content has its own MIME type. Now, up to this point, when we're working with the web API, a lot of times you work with JSON as your MIME type and sometimes XML as your MIME type. But you're not actually limited to that with the web API. You can actually code the web API to send other kinds of MIME types over the internet. So you can actually write code that will send PDFs via the web API, or images, or other kinds of files besides just JSON or XML. So by doing this, you can return virtually anything that could be sent over the web, but just know that you are going to have to write some plumbing code for every kind of MIME type you want to support. Now, for most applications, this is probably not going to be a huge deal because if you are accessing services remotely, you're mostly working with data. And data is easily sent as JSON, and that takes care of 99% of the things we want to do. But every so often, you might want to stream that graphic over bit by bit, or you might want to send that comma delimited file because it has to go to a system that reads all of its data in comma delimited files. Maybe it's an older system. That's something I run into from time to time just about everywhere I go. So it's helpful to know how to return other kinds of files. And here's how you do it. First of all, you inherit from the buffered media type formatter. This is a base class that exists in the web API that you can override and just customize it for the particular kind of file or the kind of data that you're going to be sending. You need to override certain key methods. There's 2 or 3 that you're going to need to get into and actually tell it how to handle your kind of data. Because, for instance, if I'm streaming binary data, like an image or a PDF, I'm going to need to use a different kind of stream writer from the .NET framework than if I'm sending over, say, some kind of text file, like a direct HTML response or a comma delimited file. Once you've written the class that handles this MIME type, then you need to attach it to the configuration. We have all kinds of extensibility in the web API, all kinds of hooks that we can attach our own code to, and this is one of them. We can write as many MIME type interpreters as we want, and then we just simply attach them to the configuration for the web API, and now the web API is actually able to stream classes as the MIME types that we've declared. Now we're going to take a look at how we can take our web API data and write them out as different MIME types to a client. What I have here is my book class, and once again, normally this is going to be sent out from the web API as a JSON response. If the request is for XML, it'll send it out as XML. But by default, the web API is not going to be able to just switch between different MIME type requests. It doesn't know how to send this out as a PDF. It doesn't know how to send a book out as a comma delimited file. And so what we're going to do is we're going to assume that we have some client that needs book data in CSV format, a comma delimited file format. This is not uncommon as you're moving data around a distributed environment, because a lot of times you will have legacy systems and they use a comma delimited file for their data import and export. And so the ability to export data directly to them into directories that they use is actually pretty handy when you're using legacy systems. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to write a media formatter specifically for comma delimited files and getting our book into that format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to my controllers folder. Once again, it's not really the ideal place for it because it's not a controller. I just need some place to put it. but what you might want to do is create a folder specifically for your media formatters. Call it Mime formatters or media formatters or what have you. Since I'm just doing the one-off here, I'm going to go ahead and put it in my controllers folder. And I'm just going to add a new class. And you don't have to follow a specific naming convention here. I'm just going to write it as we'll call it book CSV formatter. Now, if I were using the CSV format for more than books, that would be a terrible class name, but for our purposes, I think it's going to work just fine. What I need to do is inherit from the buffered media type formatter. This is actually going to be in the HTTP formatting namespace, so I will put that in our using statements. There we go. The first thing I need to do is specify what MIME types this class is going to govern. And we do that simply by setting the supported media types property in the constructor. So I'm going to make a constructor here. So when we get an instance of this class, I'm going to set the supported media types. I'm going to add a new media type header value. Because remember, when the client makes a request, it's going to send a media type in the header of that request. Application JSON, application XML. In this case, if a header comes in asking for text CSV, we want the web API to know that this class can handle it. Let's put this namespace in the using statements. There we go. Okay, so this enables clients to make AJAX requests or however they're going to make the request, SOAP or whatever, and ask for a text/CSV response. This class is now able to provide that for them. First thing we should override is the can_write type. This is something we're sending out. If we wanted this class to also control importing comma-delimited data, then we would override the can_read type method as well. But in this case, all we're concerned about is export, so we are going to handle it in this way. And I'm going to say if the type is a book, this is coming from our models folder, then yes, I can read this. Otherwise, I'm going to get a type of a collection of books. I'll unpack this for you a little bit in a minute. Okay, so what this is doing is saying, if the class is a type of book, go ahead and say, yeah, we can read it. What we're doing if it's not a type of book is we are going to take the type of a book collection and say, can we assign this from the type that came in? In other words, is book a base of this? Can we cast this type to book? And if so, then we're going to say, yeah, as long as we can still count on it being bookish, we can go ahead and handle this as a text CSV file. The only time we have to return false is if the type that's being requested can't be made into a book no matter what we try to do. So if it's asking for a book or some class that can be cast to a book, we're going to say we can read it. Otherwise, or we can write it. Otherwise, we can't. Now I'm going to go ahead and override the read method, and I'm just going to tell it to return false. I don't care what type it is, we are not importing CSVs, so I don't want somebody to try to send us one, and I certainly don't want this code to run if they do. Okay, now we get into the heartbeat of this. Okay, we've specified what MIME types this class is going to deal with. We've specified what classes we can write out to a CSV file in this class, and of course we could write media formatters for other classes if we wanted to, or try to handle multiple classes in this one. This is usually an easier way to go. But now we have to decide, okay, we've got a request coming in for a book. It wants it as a text/CSV file. How are we going to get book data into that file format? And that's where this method comes in. It's the most important method you can deal with here. Notice we've got a read method if we're importing, but here we're just concerned with output. On write to stream. As you can see, we have a lot of stuff coming in that we could use if we needed to. Some of the more important ones we want to take a look at are the content headers that are coming in, this stream object that's coming in that we're going to use to write, the type of the object, and the actual object itself, the actual data. Okay, so we're going to utilize some of those more than others. I'm going to get rid of the default. So the way that we want to do this is we want to write this data to a stream, and that's why this method is so important, because if I'm going to output binary data, like an image file or a PDF, then I'm going to use binary stream writers to get this job done. Text data uses different stream writers to get the job done. So you can think of this method as like a black box that basically says, do what you gotta. I mean, you can use whatever stream you need to handle this data type that you've got coming in. Don't actually put this comment in your code, by the way, because the other developers will look at you funny. All right, so in this case, we want to output a text file of sorts, so I'm just going to create a stream writer. And it's going to write to the memory stream that's being passed in to this. I'm doing the using block because it's very important to dispose of these stream writers when you're done with them and get them out of memory. And so the using block is going to help us do that. As soon as it falls out of scope, it's going to get rid of that stream writer we just made. Okay, so we're going to write book data as a CSV. So I'm going to say our book list equals the object value that came in as an IEnumerable of book. Now there may just be one, but that's totally okay. A collection can have just one book in it, so we're just fine. So I'm taking the object data that came in, I'm casting it to an IEnumerable of book, and the first thing I want to see is if that conversion failed, because then that means that something sort of slipped past our verification. So if the book list is null, or in this case is not equal to null, we'll take care of that first. We'll assume everything worked okay. For each book in books in the book list, and I'm actually going to use a helper method here. So I'm going to say write item book, and I'm going to pass it the stream. The stream writer, I should say. This is not a method that exists anywhere. This is a method I'm going to write here in a minute. It's just a helper method. So assume that this is all the code that's going to write a book to a stream. But let's say that conversion failed. Well, one of the ways that this specific conversion could fail is if we didn't get a collection with one book in it, we actually got a single solitary book object, okay, which is going to be a little bit different than a collection that just has a single book in it. So what if I just got one book? So instead of casting it to a list that might have one book in it, I'm going to cast it to an actual book object, and that's all there is. No list, no nothing. Okay? So I'm trying this cast. If this doesn't work, then that means we've just got some weird data type. It can't be cast to a book at all, and I need to deal with that. So if this happens, I'm going to throw a new invalid operation exception. And you can make this message as specific or generic as you want. I'm going to say cannot serialize book to CSV. Once again, if this class is more generic, I might not want to make the error message that specific, but in this case, we're doing okay. So I can't cast it to a collection of books. I can't cast it to a single book. I can't deal with the value of this object. Assuming we make it past this, then I'm going to pass this to the helper method. Okay. Now, one of the things that we want to do before we send this off is we want to close the stream that we received. Streams can be very expensive memory-wise, so you don't want to leave those open. The garbage collector would handle it for us eventually, but let's just go ahead and take care of it as soon as possible. Okay, so now we're going to come down to writing our helper methods. Well, when we are writing out this data, one of the things that we need to worry about is if we have special characters that are in the data, commas, for example, line breaks. Okay, those are things we need to deal with if we're writing out to a CSV. We need to actually escape those characters. So one of the things that I want to do first is write a method that will help me escape special characters. It's something that's just kind of an issue you have to deal with when you are sending out this data type. You know, if I were sending out, say, HTML, then I might need to do the same thing with less than signs, greater than signs, that sort of thing. So it's really good to see how you can do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an array of characters that I need to deal with. And since one of the characters that I need to deal with is the double quote, I'm just going to use single quotes in this array. So I'm going to deal with commas. I'm going to deal with new lines. You know, just if you've worked with text files before, a lot of this is familiar to you. That should set us up pretty good for streaming to a comma delimited file. And I'm just going to write a little helper method here. I almost said escape bad characters, but I don't want to pass judgment on these characters. They're not necessarily bad. They're special, and we have to deal with them. So this is just some simple generic method to deal with this. You can reuse it if you like it. It's not a particularly robust way to deal with special characters, but for our purposes, it is going to work great. Let's say if we have any special characters in here, okay, that's what this is saying. Then I'm going to return a replacement for it. And all I'm going to do is return a string with an escape character in front of it. Okay, this is where text highlighting is really, really great because there were a lot of opening and closing quotes to deal with that. Otherwise, I'm just going to return the value. If I don't have to replace anything, that is great. Okay. So that's just a little helper method. Has nothing to do specifically with formatting media types, but for this particular media type, it is an issue we have to deal with. Okay, so now our write item method is going to be very simple. This is what I'm going to use to get an individual book into a CSV format. So I'm being passed in a book, like here, I'm passing in a single book or a book from a list. And a stream writer to write out. And just a real quick line here, and we should be good to go. Let's say stream writer, write line. This is going to be for the books we receive. And I'm going to write out a comma delimited line. If they use pipe delimited, I could do the same thing here with pipes. This is specifically a CSV we're trying to stream out. And the first thing that I need to do is escape special characters on the book's ID. Shouldn't have any, but want to make sure that we are protecting our data. As soon as you say this should never happen, then it will happen. Title, author, and finally price. And that's all there is to that. So all we're doing is writing out this comma delimited output to the stream, and it will be returned as text/CSV because that's what's going to be in our request. The only thing we have left to do is to add this formatter to global.asax. I'm going to come down here to our little configure global routine. I'm just going to add configuration, formatters, add new book CSV formatter. And now that's part of the toolbox that the Web API has. Any requests for book data that come in and the request type is text/CSV, it will invoke our class and write the data out to a stream as we specified in our stream writer.